This is the Sony 35mm f1.4 G Master lens, and if I had to pick just one lens in this entire system, it might just be this one. Now, this video isn't sponsored by Sony. They have no idea I'm making this, any of that kind of stuff. But I did want to talk about this after having it for about a year now and using it far more than I thought I was actually going to. And recently I also picked up a new Leica Summilux 35 and was just curious how close the lenses are. Like, what do they really look and feel like? I also have this Zeiss 35mm f1.4 Distagon for the Leica M system that is sitting on my A7CR here. So I do have a pretty decent understanding of what 35mm lenses can be like, at least, or at least high-end 35mm f1.4 lenses, because I definitely consider all three of these kind of like high-end lenses for sure. But right off the bat, this thing is absolutely, at least in this realm, the budget king of the three. Now, for a mirrorless lens, it's not big, but it's not small, right? So it just fits well on a camera like the A7 series. This is the A7R5, and it just fits perfectly. Like, it's not too big that it makes this camera hard to handle, and it's not like too small where it would be better suited on a camera like the A7CR here. And so if I'm gonna just think of a lens size that's going to fit perfectly within the system, it's definitely just sitting here. It doesn't weigh a ton, but it just kind of like is the kind of lens that I would want on a system like this. And the only reason it does fall down barely, if I want it to, is because I have a base plate on here. Otherwise, obviously, it's not going to do that. One of the other things that I really love about the Sony GM lenses here is this is the 50 1.4 GM. I picked this up after they announced it as well, and they are all really, really similar in size and weight. They aren't as small and light and exact in size as the Lumix lenses are, but they are very, very similar. The 20mm is a little bit smaller. The 24 is slightly smaller as well, but the 20, the 24, the 35, and the 50, 1.4 at least, are all very similar in size and weight. So if you have one on one shoulder and one on another shoulder, they all just kind of work interchangeably very, very well. And it's something that I never really realized was important in a series, but if you are someone that's going to have multiple lenses, having them all be really similar in size is just a really nice convenience. Now, this thing has Sony's linear focusing motors. It has all of the low dispersion elements, all of that crazy technology that they're putting into all these lenses. It has all of it. As with the other G Master lenses, it has a really nice clickable aperture ring that you can declick as well. It has a single multi kind of function button here on the side. It also has a AF/MF switch and a focus by wire manual focus ring here. It's something I frankly just don't even use on these cameras because the autofocus is so incredible that, like, why would I manually focus? The only time I do is if I'm doing lens tests and need just absolute critical focus. But as far as obviously just focusing goes on these things, it's fantastic. You would never have any issue with any of the modern GM lenses from Sony for sure. Now, you can skip this if you want, but the 35mm focal length, especially pairing it with a 1.4 aperture, is a very, very good documentary kind of focal length and something that gives you a lot of environment around you while still giving you that pop and subject separation that, especially in the portrait and wedding space, we have a lot of that. That's kind of the style. And the reason behind that is mostly because you can't control your environment very much at all in those situations. And so you can either go about making interesting images by using a shallow depth of field, using composition, using lighting. And one of my just easy favorite ways to do that is with a shallow depth of field. And again, I use this lens really often for that, especially in a landscape mode where I'm able to capture a lot of the scene going on while still separating my subject very well from the background. And while I do really love a 28mm focal length as well, Sony doesn't make one. And so I'm kind of in between the 24 and the 35, and I just find the 35 to be a little bit more useful for kind of everything. And honestly, it's definitely between a 50 and a 35. If I could only choose one lens to shoot an entire day on, it would probably be a 35, especially with a camera like this, because I could just punch in to an APS-C crop mode, get a 50mm perspective, and still be able to shoot the vast majority of stuff I do on a wedding day. Now, down to the more like nitty-gritty details. This lens is stupid sharp, and I mean that in a like a literal way. So it is so sharp. It is sharper than the Leica 35 Summilux here. It is sharper than the Zeiss Distagon here. It is just wildly sharp. And that is honestly like a good thing and a bad thing. So I would rather have a lens that is too sharp and I have to dumb it down a little bit versus having a lens that isn't sharp enough and I have to try to like artificially do something with it. But even on a 60 megapixel sensor like I have with actually all three of these cameras here, it is just wicked sharp, even wide open, even at the like close focus distance. I did some tests where I tested these three lenses together, and the Sony GM was by far the sharpest of the three. So this is definitely a lens that, as far as sharpness goes, is definitely in that like clinical range. I'm sure if you looked at like the MTF charts or whatever between the Summilux M and the 35 GM here, you would probably see that it's like literally clinically sharper. I would be very surprised if the 35 Summilux was sharper than the 35 GM. And also in terms of the out of focus elements and the bokeh, things like that, it does have a good look to it. Again, it's not as kind of like vintagey as the Zeiss or the Leica here, but it does feel a little bit better than I would think a lens that feels clinical would. It still has some interesting looks to the bokeh. It's not just like completely uniform across the thing. You have a little bit of swirl. You have a little bit of like that cat's eye look to it. But I do think that of the GM lenses that I've used, it definitely has like a really good look to it. And again, comparing it to the others here in terms of things like chromatic aberration, it has the least of these lenses here as well. So that means in terms of a lens that I have to go in and do corrections to, the only corrections I'm honestly doing are to make sure that if I'm photographing people, it's not picking up too much detail, which is pretty nuts. Even at 1.4, this is a lens that you could shoot just about everything at 1.4 and it'd be amazing. So if you are someone that is in the Sony ecosystem and hasn't picked up a 35 1.4 and you do any sort of documentary work, you do weddings or editorial work with people, I think this is a very good lens and one of the first lenses I would buy in this system for sure. It does everything that I would want it to do. It has a good look to it. It is built fantastic. It has an aperturing, which I love. It's not too big that I don't want to carry it around. And honestly, for the price point, these things aren't that expensive in comparison to what other companies could be charging for something like this. So thanks so much for watching. If you want to check out my video on the 50 1.4 GM, you can check that out here. You can check out my video on the A7R5 up here, and I will see you in one of those videos.